What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Coach to Coach podcast. My name is Kevin Turner. I go by ShredQuest. ShredQuest because I like getting people in shape. I'm joined by my buddy Joe Brooks, who is also a coach. Today, we're going to shoot the shit. We're going to talk about some training and whatever else we get into. So we'll do a little catch up as usual. Joe, what's going on with you? How you been?
Yeah, I'm feeling good. I know last podcast you and I were talking. I was just super low energy. Wasn't really excited to get in the gym. I had taken so I have two leg days in a week. Two leg days, two upper body days in a week. And I had taken the first one off last week. Just knees feeling a little beat up. I had detailed that a little bit to you. So I just took one of them off, and the next programmed leg session felt great, and that was at the end of last week. I had my first leg session of the week Tuesday. That felt great. So I think the time off did my body well. I'm feeling good. Energy's back to where I would like it to be. So yeah, I have upper two later today. We've added in some 2 IUs of growth in the week, so I'll have my third injection of that tonight. And yeah, clients are doing well. I've signed a couple people in the last 2 weeks, and I'm just super excited. It always means a lot to me when people are trusting me with their process and stuff. But I got the ball rolling with them. Current clients are doing well. We're seeing the weight fall off for people that are wanting to get shredded and stuff. So everything's going smooth. It's been a good week, and yeah, I got some grocery shopping to do later. But how are things with you?
They're doing all right. Just kind of the same old as of lately, at least. Training's pretty inconsistent. It's just a time crunch, but I do have the babysitter back home. She's actually upstairs right now, so just trying to get back into a good groove. But I'm hanging on, and I'm staying away from all or nothing. Right. So just because I can't do it how I want to do it doesn't mean that I'm going to do nothing. So just there's been a couple days where it's literally okay, I got half hour. What can I get done? What exercises can I get done? It's not the whole workout, but it's been infinitely better than doing absolutely nothing. So just hanging on there. Body weight is just being super consistent because the food is super consistent. So outside of that, clients are doing well. I don't think I got anything spectacular going on. No competitions coming up with any of my clients. It's pretty much just smooth sailing there. I guess we can jump in and maybe talk about you're having your first exposure to growth hormone. And so have you started it yet?
Yeah. Third injection will be tonight.
Okay. Yeah. And we just decided to start you at 2 IUs, which is a pretty conservative. And this depends on why you're taking the growth hormone. But if you're talking about bodybuilding, 2 IUs is a pretty conservative dose. And so my thought process on it is just start low, like with most things. Because if you plug a bunch of growth hormone in at one time, it's what are we talking about? We're talking about, hey, a bunch of water retention could come on. That's, you know what I mean? So just to try to get away from that, it's start 2 IUs, see how that goes. I don't think that if you were to stay at 2 IUs, you would have anything revolutionary happen. You might not notice much. Maybe you get a little bit of enhanced fat loss. Maybe you see a little bit of fullness. But I think that the real fun starts happening, above 4 IUs. 4 to 6, you get a lot out of that. And then when you get up above 6 IUs, I think you're getting into real deal bodybuilding. So, but just starting low and just trying not to have your visual skew, trying to stay away from carpal tunnel syndrome because, if that water retention comes on really, really quick, you can find yourself in a place where you got carpal tunnel syndrome, and that's just brutal to deal with. I've had that at one point. I think I was doing around 8 IUs of growth hormone, and I had worked up a little bit too quickly. I want to say I jumped from 6. I had been on 6 for a while and jumped to 8 or something like that. So just a 2 IU hike, but that was enough to have that come on. And when it came on, it started as man, my fingers feel kind of weird.
Yeah.
And I wasn't even really understanding that it was carpal tunnel syndrome. And then it just slowly started to build to the point where I was like dropping shit. And I was like, why the fuck am I keep dropping shit? And it's because my fingers were numb, right? And I want to say it started as these two fingers or these two fingers. I can't remember.
Mm.
Maybe it was two fingers, but it started like that, just like fingers being a little bit numb. And then that progressed to like pins and needles. And the pins and needles started going from my hand all the way up into my shoulder. And for me, I know a lot of people talk about how it's really bad at night. For me, it wasn't so much bad at night, not worse. It was just there all the time. It was there at night. It was there
Right.
during the day. And it was just a nightmare to the point where I was like, okay, well, you know, I tried to pull the dose down, didn't have anything happen in any, you know, decent amount of time. So then I ultimately just had to pull it out because like I can't keep living like this because it's
Right.
not fun, you know. So just ended up pulling it out and then having to reset, let some of that water retention wash off, and then go back in and titrate up intelligently. And so that's just we're trying to avoid all that shit with you. So we just plug in a little bit,
Yeah.
see how she goes, and then we scale up from that point. So
Is the hunger that people say that they face when incorporating this, is it actually like as extreme as they might think it is? I'm assuming it's still depending on dose.
you might be mixing this up with a secretagogue like MK677 or one of the GRP
Okay.
peptides. Because there's a couple different ways that you can increase your growth hormone, right? Through performance enhancing drugs, essentially. You can just straight up inject growth hormone, right? Or you can inject something or use something, I should say, that causes your body to create more growth hormone on its own. And that is where the GHRP peptides and the MK677 comes in. And those things act on ghrelin, right? So those things, ghrelin is like kind of like a hunger hormone. Those things will absolutely drive your appetite sky high. Whereas if you're plugging in just straight HGH, like you're skipping that whole process, right? So it's just
Gotcha.
HGH. So for me personally, and most of the people that I work with, most of my peers in the space, I don't like the hunger thing jumping up with growth hormone. I don't really see that to be a thing. I'm sure maybe for some people it could be, but I just don't really see that to be a thing because we're not really doing anything that should increase it. You know what I mean?
Right. Right. Okay. Yeah. I kind of thought anything revolving involving growth hormone meant that the appetite was going to shoot up.
No, yeah, it's just the mechanism by which the MK677 and the GHRPs, the mechanism by which they increase growth hormone is through ghrelin. So that is gonna have your appetite come up a good grip, and those can be useful things. I think MK677 gets bashed a lot because of its insulin desensitizing effects. But I think if you use it intelligently and strategically and don't, you know, go crazy with it, I think it can actually be a really useful thing, especially if you are somebody that has not a great appetite, right?
Yeah.
It can be like two birds, one stone. Like you get the elevated growth hormone, you get the appetite increase, and you just need to pay attention to like what your blood sugar is doing. You know what I mean? And I think it could be
Yeah.
a
So
good tool.
you might add something like an MK in a bulk. Of course, if meals are getting high. You're not wanting to eat as much. So something to increase appetite, might help.
Yeah, yeah, you could. I've used MK677. I've used a lot of SARMs, and I know SARMs get bashed, right? People say SARMs are shit and they don't work. My experience, I've had some of like the strongest responses. And I don't know if I should say it like that. I've had some really good responses from using SARMs. LGD, really, it works for me incredibly. S23, which is something that I used quite a bit, and also something that I believe like really killed my fertility. because
Okay.
it's supposed to be wildly suppressing, and I believe it was actually researched as a like a male contraceptive.
Mm.
But S23 is something I noticed incredible strength gains and it was like, man, it's one of those things where, you know, people say I could just eat whatever I wanted. I just kept getting leaner. It was kind
Mm.
of like that. And I, you know, of course I'm not eating whatever I want, but it was like that. It was a very pronounced leaning effect using that compound. And now today, right? Because this was years ago. This is like early on. I'm not doing blood work at this time, so I don't really know how it's impacting me on that level.
Right.
And I, you know, and I don't. I'm not really well versed in it, but I would imagine that the SARMs, you know, if I would imagine that they would treat your lipids like orals, like oral steroids. So you're probably going to see some pretty significant HDL suppression. You're probably going to see maybe see your LDL do some funny stuff and float up a little bit. But I think the general consensus that why use SARMs when you can just use gear is probably a good idea, right? I think SARMs really have most application with females is really where that goes, especially if you're a male trying to take a SARM and not have a base of testosterone in place, which I always did when I was
Mm.
using all this stuff. Because the SARMs, they're not, there's no testosterone. So they're going to suppress your natural testosterone, right? They're going to give you, going to act as an androgen essentially, but suppress your natural testosterone. And then you've got the lipid skewing. And so the whole SARMs healthier than gear thing, I don't know that that's true. And it's probably just best to say, just use the real shit that we have a bunch of information on, you know?
Yeah, yeah. That's actually that's a great point. The for females and stuff, because I mean I've just heard that I don't know how many times I've heard that the SARMs were just better than steroids. That you know you're still I've heard people say like, oh, you're still considered natty if you're on steroids or on SARMs. I mean, um, so yeah, yeah, like that's just a good point.
Tony, the days of Tony Huge. Any of the OGs remember, man? Like I remember when I first started getting into YouTube and like, you know, watching bodybuilding content, I was big into Tony Huge. He had Coach Trevor with him, and then like Boston Lloyd was big at that time, and like it was kind of he was really the one pushing the whole SARMs thing, and that has since fizzled out. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
yeah.
Um, yeah. Well, so speaking of bodybuilding content, if you don't mind if I talk about a different, slightly different topic, but still in the same realm. I was watching a podcast with Justin Harris. We've mentioned him a couple times on the podcast. I can't remember whose podcast it was, but it was. I mean, it was pretty solid. But they got on the topic of training, and Justin's kind of take on training was that progressive overload is it becomes a slippery slope after some time because you just get focused on either hitting the PR or getting the weight from A to B, and so it becomes less about engaging the muscle and more about just either getting the rep or getting the weight up. But I guess my question would be if that's not your if that's not the way that you are focused on training, like where is there to go if that's not how you're going to be doing things in the gym? Like, what would be the alternative to progressive overload training?
You need to have a fundamental understanding of what grows muscle. What is the stimulus that causes muscle to grow? And if you can understand that, then you can believe it and have confidence in it. But a lot of what gets said in our space is progressive overload, right? And when most people hear progressive overload, they hear more weight, more reps, right? And that is not exactly what it just boils down to. So muscles grow through mechanical tension and potentially some metabolic stress, right? The pump, right? That's kind of what we understand at present. It's mechanical tension is a driving force. So you can have mechanical tension and then actually progressively overload mechanical tension without increasing the weight. And, you know, something I told you the other day, right, was just think about exercises or body parts that have low load ceilings. And when I say low, it's mean like the weight that you can use in most of the exercises, right? So think about a bicep curl. If progressive overload were the only way to build huge arms, then, you know, Nick Walker and all these other high level guys that have huge arms would be curling incredible amounts of weight, right? But they're not.
Yeah.
They're not. Same thing with delts, right? Lateral raises. If progressive overload were the only way to build big cannonball delts, then you would be lateral raising, you know, 100-pound, 150-pound dumbbells in order to keep your delts growing. And that's just not the case. So I think like once you kind of put that into perspective and say, okay, there are some exercises that have a fairly low load ceiling, right? Maybe you can get away with lateral raising 45s, 50s maybe, but it's going to get sloppy for anybody after that point. And then you're just moving weight from A to B. So if you understand that, you can say, okay, well, fuck, how did these guys grow muscle and they didn't progressively overload? And they just created tension. They just created tension in that muscle, mechanical tension, and that is what, you know, sparked the growth in the right environment. You've got adequate food, you've got adequate nutrients, adequate recovery, tension, all of those things combine to create that stimulus and response that grows muscle. Now, where it gets kind of tricky is like, I think the logbook is important, but I think it's more important for some people than others. And those some people would be people that don't have a lot of experience under their belt. And maybe not even a lot of experience is the right word, but that aren't super in tune with what it feels like to have tension on a muscle. Right. So I'm just talking, I mean, if we were going to say it like beginners, maybe even early intermediates, for them, because they can't, you know, repeatedly or consistently know when they are on tension, one of the most sure shot ways to create more tension is to use more weight. Right. But for somebody that's like, you know, pretty advanced and knows what it feels like when you're on that body part, and you put tension on it, you could almost just throw the logbook out. You could go, and I've told this to clients. I tell them like, man, you know what? I don't even really need to track reps. I don't need to count reps. I don't need to have a rep range because I know what it feels like to have tension on a muscle and take that muscle to a close proximity to failure with tension on it. I know what the feeling is. I know what that feels like internally. I don't need to count reps to find that place. And ultimately, if that place happened at 8 reps one week and 10 reps the next week and then 6 reps the week after, it doesn't matter because I have put tension on that muscle and I have taken that muscle to a proximity to failure, and that's just what it is on that day. But that kind of is almost like a flow state. That is almost something that you can't really understand until you've been doing it for a long period of time, right? So for the advanced person, it almost might make sense to say, actually throw the logbook away because you have accumulated mileage on your body that is wear and tear. You have the ability to tune into your, know what it feels like to have a good high quality set. And also the logbook can get you into trouble. It can get me into trouble because of exactly what Justin Harris said. At some point, it becomes less about the tension and more about, I did this last week and now I got to do this week, and I'm going to do whatever I got to do to get that to happen. And in that, you lose the tension. It's fucked up, actually. It's kind of crazy when you think about it, but that's really what it boils down to. So, for the advanced person, it might make more sense to say, hey, I'm going to track lifts, just lifts with a high load ceiling, right? And even then it can get tricky, but like that's maybe how I would look at it. I'm going to track my big compound movements that I can progressively overload in that way across a long period of time, because we're talking about hundreds of pounds on this thing, rather than trying to look at what you're doing week to week from your lateral raises or your bicep curls, because those are also movements where it's very, very easy to cheat away from tension, right? At some point, with a leg press or with a hack squat, you almost, unless you're taking a bunch of rest at the top of the rep, locking your knees out, you almost can't get away from the tension. You know what I mean?
Right.
So then at that point, it just becomes a matter of making sure that you're operating through the same kind of ranges of motion and not shortening up things, right? Not bouncing, just controlling the weight. So yeah, it can be a slippery slope, but one thing that you have to just keep in your head is that progressive overload isn't just one dimensional. It's way more than that. And it really comes down to tension. It comes down to tension and that feeling. So that is what you're going after. If you have a training session in which you didn't progress loads or reps, but you got a really good response and feedback out of that muscle, and you racked up high quality sets, that doesn't mean you've gone backwards. It doesn't mean you've gone backwards, or it was an L, or it wasn't a productive session. I don't know. What are your thoughts on it? I was talking for a while.
Well, I would just have so I'm trying to figure out how I want to word this. It sounds like he was just talking about progressive overload in the form of just like weight and reps then, because if you're still able to create more tension from week to week, is that not still a form of progressive overload? Like,
It
you know what I'm
is.
saying? Or even in the movements that you were talking about, like, they're not using super heavy weights and curls and stuff like that. But okay, say they're using 30-pound weights, and they're adding reps every week. That's still a form of progressive overload, I guess. So
Right. And well, I
you
think
know,
what he was speaking in simple terms is what most people understand as progressive overload. Most
okay,
people understand progressive overload as sets and reps, or sorry,
right,
as weight across a certain amount of reps, right? But yeah,
right,
progressive overload it's more tension is what you're after, right? So it could be by you adding pauses. It could be by you controlling the tempo more, right? More time under tension, which can kind of be argued in itself, which I don't go down that rabbit hole. But there are a number of ways to increase or have progressive overload that are not just weight and how many reps you do. I would actually even go further, and I don't know if there's any science that we have to validate this, but I would actually almost say, and just this is my logical kind of conclusion, is that you don't actually need progressive overload at all. You just need mechanical tension in the presence of enough nutrients. It's probably to some degree like a light switch. If you've created the signal and then you give the substrate to grow the muscle, that's it, right? And I kind of come to that conclusion because of the bicep curls and the lateral raises, right? Like, and also like let's kind of analyze progressive overload outside of weight and reps. Let's look at progressive overload in terms of creating more tension and quantifying that more tension as slower tempo, pausing, right? That has a ceiling too. What the fuck? What are you going to do? You're going to make this leg press set that was 1 minute, and now it's 2 minutes, right? Okay, so
right,
more time under tension. You've had a slower tempo. You've had more tension, right? Well, what are you going to do now? Take that to 3 minutes and then 4 minutes and 5 minutes,
right,
and then now you're spending fucking 10 minutes doing a fucking leg press set? Like that also, that has a ceiling somewhere. So it can't just be always about progressive overload. It can't just be that. It can't be as simple as that. And what I think it is really is that it is a mindset thing. Mindset, a neural, it's your mind. It's your ability to call upon that muscle and contract it more than anything, contract it under tension. So maybe a way to think about this is like when you're early on, you do a bicep curl, you squeeze the muscle, and maybe you're only able to get 30% of the fibers to actually squeeze, right? And then as you get
right,
better at this and you build that connection with that bicep, maybe it goes 50%, right? And 60% and 70%. And then at some point you're at 100%. And this is completely outside of the weight that you're using. But when you get to that high level where you can contract that muscle with all of the fibers, I'm willing to bet that at that point, you could probably grow off of any reasonable amount of weight. It doesn't have to do with the weight. And I'll just use myself as a kind of an example here. I don't have a good connection with my biceps. Okay, I want bigger That's always a thing I'm after, is like, I want bigger arms. I want bigger biceps. I've never had a good connection with my bicep. It doesn't fucking matter if I, work. I've done all sorts of shit for my arms. I've tracked the volume incredibly close. I've done progressive overload. And I think it really just has to come down to, I need to kind of get into a flow state I need to let some of these hard, set in stone, tangible things that I can grab that make me feel like I'm progressing my biceps, and get into the art of it, get into my mind and try to visualize all of the fibers of my bicep contracting. And, it's kind of foo-foo, but I think that is really the thing. I think that is the thing where a lot of guys that have, develop their physiques, they can really contract their muscles. They can really make that mind to muscle connection on a very, very high level. So I think it has, and the unfortunate thing about that is, how the fuck do you study that in science? You
Right.
I don't know. You probably don't. And so the only thing that we can kind of put on paper as tangible, or the way that we can study it, is, okay, we had these participants and then we did this with the weight and the reps, and then that got us this. How the fuck are you going to say, okay, he had 30% muscle activation and then 100%? Like, how do you study that? You know what I mean? You don't. So
Right.
it's just easier, or what we have available to us is progressive overload as we know it.
I like the little gem about get into the art of it. That was a good way to put that. But do you think that there's anything to maybe using, or I guess making the moving weight from A to B useful, in using that to get stronger, to then transfer to not as heavy weights as that, but getting better at doing less weight, but ends up overall being a bit heavier than what you would normally do? Do you get what I'm trying to say?
I think,
Like,
and
using those A to B type sets to get stronger, get under more weight, and then use that to then maybe you drop the weight down, but you keep you up the reps, and using those as a way to get bigger, get stronger. You get what I'm trying to say?
yeah, and that's kind of what we're trying to do with you. But and I think that this is another kind of foo-foo thing. And I think what it is like, okay, I'm going to spend some time really developing strength. Like, what strength. I'm A to B,
Yeah.
strength. Much of what strength is a nervous system adaptation. That's a lot. Like, of course, the bigger the muscle is, the more potential you have to, have strength. But a lot of strength is central nervous system adaptation. So it could make sense to, for a period of time, build up your strength, build up your connection and skill with a movement, build up that nervous system, and then refocus that, right? Refocus that nervous system, refocus that buildup on something that's a little bit more specific and controlled on tension. I think that is, I think that's a good thing, 100%, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and we had a version of that, right? Even with my squat, it's get strong with it, and then even last week you were like, let's find a way to make it tougher while using the same load, which was, you gave me 3-second eccentrics, and whatever that was, I can't remember off the top of my head, but it was like slow the set down, and just make it tougher, and just get better at that movement, better at control.
Yeah, I think that I think even in bodybuilding, there is some use in periodization. Because like in a lot of different sports, maybe even like powerlifting, we could say, A portion of the year, that the training year, is going to be spent maybe focusing on higher rep cardio capacity work, endurance work, we can kind of just say, right? And then a portion of the year is going to be focused on hypertrophy. And then a portion of the year, usually leading into your competition, is going to be focused on strength, like building your actual strength, right? And each of those things, you kind of need to focus on them one at a time in order to do them really well. And each of those things is going to kind of get you a different adaptation, right? Endurance, hypertrophy, strength, right? Those are all different adaptations. But also, it's going to maybe actually increase your ability to have a more fluid or dynamic mind-muscle connection under varying circumstances. And so, it might, something like that might just allow you to overall have a better connection with your body, a better relationship with your body. And that sounds kind of weird to say, but I think that there is value in that. In bodybuilding, it's like we don't really need to be phasic or periodized, because all we care about is hypertrophy, right? So I don't know that you would want to get too far away from it for too long, because that is the ultimate goal. But I think that there is application to have periods of time where you say, hey, right now I am focused on strength. Right now I'm focused on hypertrophy. Right now I'm focused on, more endurance or cardiovascular work or whatever the case may be. And I think that overall, as long as you set that up right and you don't have huge portions of the year where you are away from your main shtick and hypertrophy work, I think that overall would create a better athlete.
Yeah. So, I mean, basically by the end of the podcast, it sounded like his kind of take on everything was give the muscle enough tension to grow and then get out and eat however you need to eat in order for that muscle to build.
So I'm going to tell you something here, and this is just me. I believe like a light switch. He was kind of talking like a light switch. Do enough to turn that light switch on and then get the fuck out.
Yes. I think he literally used that analogy.
Okay. Lee Haney, stimulate, don't annihilate, right? And then you have people that say you can't overtrain, yada, yada, yada. I know I can overtrain. I know I can overtrain and burn up muscle. This is just me and my body. My body wants me to be skinny, okay? I know I can overtrain. I know I can eat up muscle in a session because I've done it. I've done it. I had a period of time where I had come off of everything, and so it's kind of, right, this is not the best setup for an experiment, but I had a period of time when I kind of came off everything, and I was on TRT for a while and then ultimately came off of everything. But for a long period of time, for like a year or so, I was just on TRT. And in that period of time, my physique like fucking melted. Like really, really weird. My physique melted, right? And now in contrast to right now, where I'm barely fucking training, and everything is just kind of just the same, I was training incredibly hard. I was trying to do at that point in time, I was trying to do everything that I had been doing at the volumes and at the weight that I had been doing them. And slowly but surely, it's like I wasn't listening to my body. Body started hurting, visual started going backsliding, and then I found myself like, how the fuck did I get here? Like, and my food never slipped up. Food was always on point, but my physique just absolutely melted. And so something that I've always noticed with myself is that when I have really hard training sessions, long training sessions, I smell like ammonia. I smell a very strong ammonia. It's almost like a pine sol smell. And I believe that is protein being burnt up. I think that's me eating into, I think that's me eating into my fucking muscle, starting to burn up amino acids. And so for me and maybe some other people, I think that it is absolutely almost, let me give you another example. This last cut that I did, in which I got in really good shape, almost the easiest that I've ever been, right? I could have hopped on stage. I should have. During that time, I was training 3 days per week, 3 or 4 days per week. It was like upper, lower, upper, and arm day, right? And the volume was pretty low by most people's standards. That was the easiest fat loss phase I'd ever had. I had a very good outcome on my look. Everything came together really well, doing not a whole lot of work by most people's standards. And I think a lot of that came down to me not running my body into the ground, trying to be a maniac while I was in a deficit. And so, that's something that I've kind of bookmarked. Like, okay, maybe it's not just for me. Maybe it's not just about going there and try to murder yourself every single time. Maybe it's about going there and do enough to turn that light switch on and then get the fuck out and start recovering. Because if you dig too deep, you're not getting out of this hole, dude. You can't get out of this hole, right? And if you're in a fat loss phase and the food is just not at a place where you can use that as a buffer, you're definitely not getting out of that hole. So I think that there is, and ultimately we don't actually know. We don't, you almost have to kind of come to your own conclusions. You can listen to this guy, you can listen to the science nerds, yada, yada, yada. But ultimately you got to kind of come to some of these conclusions on your own through your body's feedback and your own experiences,
Yeah. I don't know that, yeah, that's great. The fact that you've run these experiments on yourself, I think a lot of people are going to be able to pull from that type of stuff. People are really only relying on studies and what they hear from other people. So,
and that's also where coaches come into play too, because in a lot of these experiments that I've done, right, where I try to just, and I do this, I do that. Some of it is just so far outside of where I need to be at that it's, I don't want to say wasted time because I've gained valuable insight, but if you work with a coach, they have worked with enough people. This coach has likely worked with enough people to say that I know that this sort of thing works for most people. And then from that, then you're probably going to fall into that most people bucket. You know what I mean? Whether it's for the training, whether it's for the nutrition, overall approach, you kind of get a good gauge of, okay, this is kind of where most people fall at. And then through the process of coaching back and forth, you can kind of understand, is this person an outlier? What does this person need exactly? You kind of build up all that database and you can kind of steer the ship. But I think there's absolutely value in experimenting and really taking the time to learn your body. But I also think that the experimenting can ultimately make your journey longer. Right. So that's just something important to understand.
Yeah. That was that was pretty much all I had, to be honest. I think we covered a lot. Did you have anything else? Anything that you want to talk about?
No, I think that's good. We're about 48 minutes, so we covered a bunch of good stuff. So we'll just wrap it up there.
Perfect. Hey, thank you everyone for watching. We'll catch you guys next week. Like, share, subscribe, all that fun stuff, and we'll see you on the next one.
Peace.